So, hey everyone, welcome to Books, Brews, and Besties. I'm Kaylee,
I'm Jenny.
and we have our brew. Do you? This is a little bit that we do, and and we are joined today with Mershon Niesner, who is the author of the Bootmakers Wife.
Well, my whole life has been about women entrepreneurs. I'm a retired life coach, and I coach mostly women entrepreneurs. So I'm always happy to help people out that are getting started, and especially young women like you guys. It's
I
wonderful.
love that. I did. I read your biography and everything on your books, and I was like, she's doing so much.
Well, I'm retired, so I'm not doing as much as I once did, but it's all good. Yeah, I just finished another book, so that's a good thing. I'll talk about that later.
I was gonna say that is probably gonna go into one of our questions for you. You want to start off with?
Yes, I will go. So, my first one was it a lot of research to write about this? I did read that you have lived in Nebraska, and I was just wondering, like, how much did you have to research for this one?
Yeah, there's a lot of research when you write historical fiction because my theory is for people who that's their main genre, that they mostly read historical fiction. If they read something and they somehow find out that it's not accurate, then they're going to doubt everything else. I mean, it's kind of human nature.
Yeah.
So it's very, very important, at least to me, to be 100% historically accurate. Now, this book was, as you know, was inspired by my great grandparents. So there was a certain baseline of information that was just factual information. And then I made up other parts to make it a full story. But I did do a lot of research, and I happened to have a very, very old book that was originally written in the very early 1900s. And that author had actually interviewed some of the original people that I talk about. So that was a great opportunity. But yeah, a lot of research. Thank goodness for Google.
Right?
I grew up in an era of card catalogs, so uh, Google is
The good
awesome.
old days.
Yes.
And that actually kind of leads into one of my next questions, which was initially because I did see that this book is inspired by your great grandparents' stories. Was that something that like your parents told you as you were growing up? Did you find old photo albums of them from that time period, or were they still around while you were growing up to where you actually got to talk to them and learn their stories firsthand? How did those stories come about in your life to even inspire
Yeah.
this book?
Yeah, good question. Well, first of all, I'm an only child. I'm a motherless only child. So my first book is about mother loss, because my mother died when I was 8. Her mother died when she was 3. And in that case, I interviewed 50 women who had mother loss. But anyway, so the stories that I heard some stories growing up. My dad was a great storyteller, and he's long gone. He died at 92, but and I'm 78 and a half, by the way. So, anyway, so I did hear some of the stories, like the Jesse James story, which is one of my favorites. That's a true story. I heard that as a child. We used to have the actual IOU. For those of you who haven't read the book, it's a really great story. And one of the things I say at the back of the book, I say the things in this book that are absolutely historically true, and I know because my family experienced them, those are the most unbelievable. The things that are fantasy that I made up, they're believable. And that's kind of true in life sometimes, right?
It
It's like
is.
real life is pretty crazy. So I heard some of those stories from my dad. Not a whole lot. I knew he was a bootmaker. And my dad did know him. And he knew his great grandmother, Elizabeth. And I saw her once. She died probably when I was about 4, but I do recall just a glimpse of her. But anyway, so I did hear some of those stories. I knew some basic facts: Fort Hartsuth, Bootmaker, a couple of other stories. And then I have a great cousin. It was my dad's first cousin. I contacted her, and she was actually raised by mostly Elizabeth after Charles died. So she sent me some information, and she sent me their photo, which was very interesting because, and it would have been a photo pretty early on. I mean, Elizabeth looks young, and it could have, they hardly had any photos in,
Yeah.
1875. So it might have been taken actually at their wedding, which would have been September of 1875. So she sent me a few things. I found out a few more things. But anyway, and then all the rest was just research.
I love that so much, especially since there are a few, even though there are a few pictures that you even got to see, one is amazing since it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Years ago, you kind of forget how long time is.
I know, that's a long, long, long time ago. And then I have when I do a presentation, usually a live presentation, although could be here too, but I have a lot of photos that I took when I went to the location. I couldn't go the year I wrote that book was COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But before I published it, the following summer of 22, I was able to go to the Sand Hills. I visited Fort Hartsuff. I actually walked along Bean Creek where they lived. And then I went to Pioneer Village and got to go inside a real sod house. I got to see actual wagons like they use. So I have pictures of all those things, So that was really a cool experience. It was great.
That's right on par with one of my questions. Was that I saw that you had written it first during COVID-19, and then you got to go to Nebraska and visit and see all of these amazing things. I was wondering, when you got back from that trip, did you look at your first draft of the Bootmaker's Wife and be like, you know what, I really need to go back in and change some things now that I've seen it with my own eyes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was able to add a lot more detail because when you've actually been in a sod house, and the sod house I was in was a double, like her friend Vi had the double. So when you're actually in one, I actually saw a rope bed like they had. Then you can be more vivid, in your descriptions. Even though I had lived in Nebraska until I was basically 21, I really never spent time in the Sand Hills. So I grew up in Grand Island, which is where they were married, and that actually is where they were married. But that's where I grew up, which is who knew?
Yeah, right?
I was so shocked when I found that out. So we didn't really, go up that way that much. But and I did this trip by myself. It was amazing, and I spent some time in a farmhouse, just by myself out in the middle of nowhere in a ranch. Got to stay at a guest house at a ranch. It was a fabulous adventure. Finding food was very challenging. But anyway, but yes, to answer your question, yes, I came back and added detail. I really could add the feeling of the Sand Hills, and they are beautiful. And the picture of the cover, by the way, I have my book somewhere. This picture is a composite of, I took the picture of the flowers as I was walking along a dirt road near the farmhouse I stayed at. And then this picture, and my designer put one on top of the other, but the background picture, that was taken on the ranch I stayed at, which is just, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 miles from where they had their sod house. So that is, those are actual photographs of the actual area. So that was cool. Yeah, it was fun.
I just had an idea. I'm so sorry to jump in. You should add like a little, I don't know, I want to say a companion book, but it wouldn't be like a whole book, but like extra with all of the photos and maybe even like a map so that we could like go and, because I'm like, if I go down in, I'm like, I want to go, if I ever go up that way, and I want to go and see it,
Well, for sure, if you ever get up in that neck of the woods, go to Fort Hartsuff, because Fort Hartsuff was completely rebuilt to be look exactly like the original fort. And that fort only existed about I don't know, 4 or 5 years. It wasn't, they built it because of sort of a crisis of, with the Indian, but then that was sort of over. And so they didn't really need it. So, but they rebuilt it. And I don't know what year that was. I can't recall, but they rebuilt all the buildings. It is, and then it's all, when you go in a building, and I have pictures of all this. So if you go in, one of the officer lived, where she went to visit the lady that wanted her to help with the night, the party for the night. Well, when you go into it's a duplex and you go in there, it's all furnished as if it would have been. So it's a wonderful place to visit, and it's just out in the middle of nowhere, but it's really a wonderful place. It's worth it. It's a wonderful place to visit, and it's a state park.
Oh,
So
that's awesome.
and they have some reenactments there, which is cool. And I also got pictures, for instance, of at that fort when it was populated. Every day the baker baked every soldier one loaf of bread. They got one loaf of bread. I mean, they got other food too. They were pretty good, but they each got a loaf of bread. And I have a picture of those bread pans, the actual bread pans. And then when they have reenactments, they get a baker out from the town somewhere and then he makes bread and they sell it. I'm like, oh, I missed that part. But anyway, it's pretty cool.
Way to immerse yourself in that. Would you be able to send us any pictures so we can have them pop up in this video when we post it?
Oh, sure. Sure. I can do that. I'm trying to think through the technology, but I'm sure I can. That's always that's always the challenge for me. But I have them on my computer. Yeah, I have, I have them printed out and put on poster boards. And when I do an in-person thing, I put them on easels, But for my other book, because I launched that during COVID, I did many, many Zoom programs, and then I showed pictures on the Zoom.
Yeah.
I could do, here I just haven't done that. But yes, I'll send you as many, the pertinent ones. Yeah, sure.
If it's easier just to do it over Facebook Messenger, that works too, just as long as I can. I think it'd be cool as, this interview progresses, because we're going to put it on YouTube too. We're trying to start a YouTube channel for this, on top of everything else. But I think it'd be really cool as you're talking, have the pictures of what you're talking about popping up. That would be interesting. But yeah, that'd be amazing. I kind of took over the question, so
I think I did. My next one was, what do you do when you're not writing? And kind of tagged on a bit to the other one was, have you actually traveled any of the Oregon Trail segments in the past? Like, have you?
Well, where I grew up, Grand Island, is on the Oregon Trail, and I was a free range kid. I mean, I had one parent. My dad worked. I was just out there in the world all the time on my own, as far as my bike would go, as far as I could go. But I do recall there are areas where you can actually still see the grooves in the ground from where the wagons went and the Oregon Trail came through. So basically I lived, within a few miles of the Oregon Trail. So, I mean, it wasn't a big thing. I mean, I never thought about it at the time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I have done the riverboat following Lewis and Clark's, which is different, of course, but the one that's in the Northwest. So from Portland to whatever that is in Canada, Victoria. I've done that riverboat tour, and that's very interesting. And it's very similar in terms of the, giving you the history and all that.
Yeah.
So, but I've never done, they do have kind of reenactments where you can be a part of an actual wagon train. Be in a wagon, and they go, I don't know how far they go, but it's kind of like being on a wagon train, and there are companies that do that, which would be fun.
Yeah.
But to answer your other question, what else do I do? Well, I do a lot of stuff. I don't know. I'm a member of a lot of organizations where I live, several women's organizations. So I do that kind of thing. I'm in a couple of book clubs. If you're a writer, you got to be in a book club, which I love. I read a lot. I don't know. I have well, my husband and I, we have a blended family. We each have 3 children, but between us, we have 19 grandchildren and 11 great grandchildren. So, that's kind of a thing too. But
Yeah, I
anyway,
bet.
and then I have been really busy, though. Of course, there's book promotion, but I've been really busy the last year, I would say. Yeah, it's been about a year now, writing the prequel to The Bootmaker's Wife. So towards the end of The Bootmaker's Wife, they talk about the bee lady, Angie, the bee lady. And she's just a made-up character. But I really liked her because she's very woo-woo, she's very mysterious. And so I got to thinking, how in the world did she get there? I mean, it's usually a figment of my imagination, but I thought if she was real, how would this old lady be living in a dugout in the middle of nowhere by herself? How could that ever be, right? So I decided to write her story so I could figure that out. So that book starts 1835, so it's
Okay.
much earlier.
Yeah.
And then because she dies in 1876. But anyway, so that book starts out with her being 10 years old, and she gets separated from the wagon train and ends up lost on the prairie. And then it's her life story from the time she's 10 years old. And there's a lot of Native American stuff in there. And actually, in some ways, it's a better story because I didn't have the constraints of real life.
Yeah.
I mean, I had certain constraints.
Freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah. With the other book, I had certain constraints, but this is like, the whole thing's made up. I mean, I still had to be true to the historical part, of course.
Yeah.
In fact, right now, it's in the hands of the Pawnee Nation's cultural director, or whatever he is, to review the parts about Native Americans because I want to be respectful and true, to their culture. So it's kind of sitting there right now. But anyway, so that takes a fair amount of time. I mean, writing a book is really hard.
I can imagine.
It really is. Trust me. And I've been a writer in some fashion all my life, basically, but not a book writer. I started out as a social worker. I wrote adoptive studies. Then eventually I had a marketing business where I wrote newsletters and press releases and scripts for video and all that. And then as a life coach, I didn't do writing, except then I did write a little book. But I've always done writing first in some way. But to write a book is a whole nother animal. Yeah, it's really hard work. I mean, it's satisfying, but it's hard.
I bet. I think it's absolutely amazing. I never even thought about how authors could give their books to different organizations to make sure that they are accurate. That is such a huge step for you to make that I feel like not every author chooses to do.
Yeah. Well, when I spoke with him on the phone, it took me a long time to reach this guy. He's in Oklahoma, of course, because that's where they got shoved. The Pawnee got shoved down. So even though their native land was Nebraska, of course, it was called Indian Territory then, but their native land was the Sand Hills of Nebraska. And then they gradually got shoved further west, and then they got shoved all the way down. So anyway, that's where he is. But when I first talked to him, the first thing out of his mouth was "thank you," was the first thing. So yeah, it felt good. So I'm hoping he comes through because I have a real affinity towards Native Americans for whatever reason. And I think they're so maligned, their story is so maligned. And in my book, actually, the Indians are the good guys and the white men are the bad guys. I mean, one in particular, but, and I think that was, often the case.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely amazing that you chose to ensure that it's as accurate as possible from the people that you're talking about.
Well, and the book that we're talking about today, The Bootmakers Wife, excuse me, before I published that, I sent it to the people at Fort Hartsuff and asked them to review it. And actually, the man who was the superintendent, he just retired this last spring, but who was the park superintendent, he passed it on to a woman that worked there because she was more in tune with this kind of book. And she read it, and then there were only one or two corrections she made. But once again, I wanted to make sure that how I depicted the fort, how I depicted, that piece in history was correct,
Yes,
So.
absolutely.
I love that. Absolutely, that's amazing. Is kind of historical fiction your go-to reading genre, or are you kind of all over, give me any book?
Oh, my personal interest?
Yeah, just for you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I do read a lot of historical fiction. I would say that's my favorite, but I read everything. I mean, I
Yeah.
try to be, right now, I'm reading this really fun book. It's called The Bucket List. It's about this young woman whose best friend died and is going to give her everything if she'll finish her bucket list. I mean, it's a very fun, cute book. Yeah. So that's, every once in a while I do what I call book candy. Like I do all the Ivanovich books. Are you familiar with her?
Yes.
I love her book. I've done every single one from 1 to whatever she's up to, 22 or whatever. I've done every book with my ears because the characters are phenomenal, but I call it my book candy. So I do book candy, but then on the other hand, I just read The Covenant of Water, 800 pages, very serious literature. One of the most beautifully written books, Versace, one of the most beautifully written books I've ever read. So, it's all over the place. Yeah. Yeah. I just read The Wager, which is a nonfiction true story of a shipwreck. Very interesting, but it reads like fiction.
It's the Barnes and Noble best author of 2023, I think.
Versace.
Yeah. I've looked at it
be.
and I was like, I don't want to read that. So
Oh, he should be. I read his other books too, but this this one, Covenant of Water, I read it this fall, and I mean, it's sometimes, as a writer, I suppose, but I think other people appreciate it too. Sometimes I'd read a passage and I'd go like this, and I just had to oh, it's so beautiful. I can hardly stand it. I mean, the way he strings words together, it's amazing, just amazing. Yeah.
And it's a good book when it makes you do that.
Yeah.
I know it. And that's, it's rare. And his writing is very lyrical. It's very deep. I mean, it's very different than mine. I'm like, I call myself a Willa Cather. I don't know if you read Willa Cather books. My Aunt Tania, she writes books about the early Nebraska.
Okay.
And she won the Pulitzer Prize many, many, many years ago. One of the first women, a gay woman at that, although at the time I don't know if they knew she was. But anyway, so and her writing is just very straightforward, not flowery, and that's how I think of mine. And I like that kind of writing, and I'm happy that that's my style. But when I read somebody like Versace, I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah.
It just hits the right spot.
Amazing, yeah.
All right. So I have 2 more questions for you.
Sure.
This one kind of dives into something that you said earlier, but I was curious how different it was to write The Bootmaker's Wife compared to your first book, because they're both on personal matters. So I was curious if it took a lot of just mental strength to be able to do both books, or how that process was for you putting your own personal life into both of your books that you've put out so far.
Interesting question. I've never been asked that question before. It's a good question. Well, the first book, Mom's Gone Now What? That book, first of all, I felt an enormous responsibility to finish it, to publish it, because a lot of the women I talked to, I mean, there aren't 50 stories in the book, but I interviewed 50 women, and some of them, their stories are in the book. But a lot of those women, when I interviewed them, they said they had never told anyone their story before. Almost everyone I interviewed was in tears at one point of the interview. It was a tremendous responsibility, I felt, to get their stories out there. So, and then there's a lot in there for me too that was very personal that, in some cases, few people knew,
Yeah.
So that was a very, very personal, very heartfelt. It took a lot more courage, really, to
Yeah.
publish that book. The Bootmaker's Wife, I mean, that came out of, that was some family story, but that was all fun stuff. That wasn't, deep in terms of psychologically deep. Yeah.
Right.
But interesting question. Yeah. and then the bee lady, that's just purely, and that's in some ways, that's the hardest because it all has to come out of your head.
Yeah.
Now I get inspired by what I read. I get inspired by anything around me, but basically, that has to come out of your head. So that's challenging because sometimes I sit around and think, well, what's next? Where's the story going? What's she going to do now? I don't know, So that's challenging too. Yeah.
The world is your oyster for this character.
It is.
Right.
Yeah.
And then my last question for you is for the Bootmaker's Wife. If there was one scene you could pick to make someone want to read this book, what would it be?
Whoa, that's a good one. Man, I don't know. One scene. Well, I I think I'm prejudiced because my head is so in the bee lady, but I loved it. So it's hard for me to kind of separate them, but I did love the scene when, well, first of all, when the bee lady gives her precious bracelet. And you'll find out the backstory of the bracelet, by the way, in her story. But then I really loved it also when Angie, the bee lady, affirmed Elizabeth and said, "You are a strong woman." I mean, she's only 15 years old, for heaven's sakes, and she affirmed her and said, "You're a strong woman. You're going to sort of make it in this life, this life on the prairie." And just because that's so important to me, that idea, I like that a lot. And I think, those kinds of things, when you hear that from someone that's had a lot of life experience, it can change your life. As a young woman, I think it can sometimes really change your life when someone says something like that to you. So that's a pretty significant scene. Yeah.
And it sounds impactful.
Exactly.
Even to the people reading it too, because you never know what people are going through. So that one scene, even though it's supposed to be impactful for the character, can impact the reader as well.
Yes, hopefully. I mean, obviously, I write books to make a difference. I mean, I want to entertain, but more importantly, is I want to make a difference. So I want people to honor the time, honor the life that their ancestors, and honor that time in history and what those people went through. But I also want them to see what a strong woman looks like, to see what an empowered woman looks like in a time when women were not empowered at all, So those are the kinds of things, the ways I want to make a difference. Yeah. And you guys are making a difference. Look at you. You're getting, people's stories out there. You're helping authors, so good for you.
We're trying, doing our best.
Good for you.
And then to close this out, do you have any, sorry. To close this out, I'm going to let you go ahead and give all the listeners a summary of your book. I guess a big question is where's the best place to purchase it? Is there anything that benefits you the most as the author, or is it people can just go on Amazon and get it, or do you have a website that you'd rather people go to purchase this book?
Oh, thank you. Well, I think the easiest is to go to Amazon. I mean, I always have books on hand. If someone has a real affinity towards this book, or if they somehow relate to me, they're an old lady that wants to be an author. I don't know if they can reach me through the book. I don't know. Maybe. I think so. But anyway, I used to have a website. I don't anymore. But anyway, if somebody, they could reach me through you, but if they wanted a book that was signed and personalized, they could do that. I would send it to them. They could buy it directly from me. But mostly, the easiest way is go through Amazon. I mean, locally, they're in bookstores and so forth, but they're not like at Barnes and Noble or places like that because I don't have a distributor.
Okay, perfect. Then yeah, we'll do a link to the Amazon page so people
That'd
can
be great.
go directly to it.
That would be great. And then the other piece too, anyone that reads it, and whether they get it on Amazon or some other source, I mean, you can buy it through several used book places now. I mean, there's a lot of, I think you can get it through Goodreads. I'm not sure. But anyway, however they get it, you could still leave a review on Amazon. And I just learned this, that even if you didn't buy it from Amazon, oftentimes they will still post your review. And then Goodreads too, you can leave a review there. So reviews are very important to authors, more important than most people realize. And it doesn't have to be written. It can just be so many stars.
Right.
But a written review is really wonderful. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point to put out for everyone. Does it help with the algorithm? Does it help just for you?
Yeah. It raises you up somehow. Yeah. And it's so complicated. I have no idea how it all works, but I do know that it's an advantage. And I do know that, it raises you up. And, I don't have tens of thousands like big authors do, but every little bit definitely helps. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. And by the way, send me a link when you have this.
Yeah, of course.
And I will publicize that link for you. I have a pretty big following on Facebook, and I don't know. Well, I do a blog, although the blog is more about the other book. But anyway, however I can promote your program, I will do that. Sure.
Thank you. Yeah. I was gonna say I'll send it to you just to send it to you. Just so you have it.
I would love it. Yeah.
For all who would like to read The Bootmakers Wife by Mershon Niesner, it's 352 pages long, and the overview of the book is: the harsh and rugged Sand Hills of Nebraska in 1875 wasn't the environment most young ladies brought up in a Victorian home in Illinois aspired to. But when Elizabeth Schultz receives a marriage proposal from Charles Horn, a bootmaker 20 years her senior, she readily accepts. A year later, she's walking behind a covered wagon along the Oregon Trail as she makes her way to Nebraska to meet her fiancé and start a new life filled with what she hopes will be adventure and an opportunity to be her own person. Elizabeth soon discovers, however, that life on the trail and in a sod house on the prairie is far more difficult than she had imagined. Can she cope with the extreme weather, isolation, food insecurity, health challenges, and her husband's dark side? Will her physical and emotional strength be enough to sustain her, or will she give up and return to a comfortable life to which she's accustomed? So if you'd like to read this novel, it is a historical fiction like we talked about in this interview. The best way to get it is, like she said, from Amazon. And if you do, we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So go ahead and comment or join our Facebook group, Books, Brews, and Besties podcast, and share your thoughts with us and join our book chats.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It was so nice chatting with you, and I'm looking forward to the Bee Ladies book. I cannot wait.
Good.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.